welcome to Pitboards and Podiums with me, Maya Westwick. In today's episode, we are going to be talking all about the Chinese Grand Prix, so buckle up and let's talk F1. Alright, so I'm going to get straight into it today. The first and only practice session of the weekend was topped by Lance Stroll. There was a red flag during the session due to a grass fire at turn 7, where basically, exactly as it sounds, the grass on the edge of the circuit set on fire, and that was because of the sparks coming off of the skid blocks hitting the floor. We had a problem with this later in the weekend as well in sprint qualifying, and that was at turn 5, so it was a bit of an issue while the grass was dry. But because of it being a sprint weekend, that was the only practice session of the weekend, so I'm going to move swiftly on to sprint qualifying, the first sprint qualifying of the year. So SQ1, the way that it's formatted for sprint qualifying, SQ1 is 12 minutes long, and it is compulsory that the drivers have to use the medium tyres for it. There can't be anybody using soft tyres to kind of try and get a faster lap because of the tyre difference. Everybody is using medium tyres, and there is a 12-minute window for them all 20 of them, to complete their qualifying laps. So this was topped by Sergio Perez for SQ1. He had a time of 1 minute 36.11 seconds. Piastri reported some light drops of rain around the circuit, and Russell also said, "Let me know if anybody is going off. It's spitting more." But it wasn't too much of an issue for SQ1. However, the weather did affect things a little bit later on. Sargent said on his team radio that Gasly impeded him. It wasn't even looked at by the stewards, I don't think, like it was not impeding. Sainz complained that a Haas had got in his way and said that that should have been a penalty. Again, nothing really came from that. And at the end of the session, as I mentioned briefly a moment ago, there was a fire in turn 5. So the same sort of thing as what happened in free practice 1, but in a different corner. And again, that was due to sparks coming off of the skid blocks as they are going over bumps in the track. As I said in the track guide, of course, Shanghai International Circuit was built on swampland, so there's going to be some levels of subsidence and the terrain moving a little bit. So having not been there for 5 years, there were some bumps because other than Formula 1, the track is not used a huge amount compared to some of the other circuits that we visit throughout the year. Sainz, Stroll, Tsunoda, Russell and Hamilton were all looked at after the session for the ruling on delta lap times, driving to the delta, maximum lap time, all of that between the safety car lines, basically to stop them driving too slowly, and they were all deemed no further action. All of their laps that had been over the limit of what was too slow had been justifiable. And the 5 drivers out in sprint qualifying 1 were Pierre Gasly. He was 0.088 seconds off getting into Q2. Esteban Ocon, 0.176 seconds off. Alex Albon, 0.268 seconds off. Yuki Tsunoda, 0.348 seconds off. And Logan Sargent, 0.379 seconds off. On to SQ2. So this is a 10-minute session where once again they have to use the medium tyres. So sprint qualifying 2 was topped by Max Verstappen. He set a time of 1 minute 35.606. And everybody apart from Verstappen, Perez and Hamilton were queuing to leave the pits, led by Lando Norris, and get out before the rain came. So when the session started, it started a little bit late because of the fire in sprint qualifying 1. So they were literally waiting in the pit lane with the tyres just going colder and colder and colder, trying to make sure that they were one of the first people out on track, because they thought that it was about to start dipping it down and it was going to be a case of whoever got their lap in first was going to get a fast lap. Of course, as I said, Verstappen, Perez and Hamilton all were not in that queue. They were not waiting and letting their tyres go cold, so they clearly thought, with the information that they had from their radars and the kind of strategy they had and within their teams, they clearly thought that they had enough time to set a good lap time before the rain came. Zhou Guanyu managed to get into SQ3. He went through in P10 at home in China, which obviously is very exciting for him because he is the first ever Chinese Formula 1 driver. So it's really special that he's getting to race at home, being the first ever driver from his country. And it was also notable that for SQ2, both of the Saubers were ahead of at least one Mercedes. And I'll get onto this. So Valtteri Bottas qualified ahead of both of the Mercedes, and Zhou was actually ahead of George Russell because George Russell did not qualify for SQ3. His time was only good enough for P11 for the sprint race. And with the rain moving in, Hamilton did skid straight off the track at one point, which was a little bit stressful, and he just said on his radio, "It's wet." But that didn't stop him from setting a lap time that was able to get him through to SQ3. Magnussen and Hulkenberg were both looked at, same as the drivers from SQ1. For their Delta safety car line 2 to safety car line 1 times, they were both again no further action. And the 5 drivers out in SQ2 were George Russell, 0.038 seconds behind of Zhou Guanyu, Kevin Magnussen, 0.166 seconds behind, Nico Hulkenberg, 0.171 seconds behind, Daniel Ricciardo is 0.246 seconds behind, and Lance Stroll 0.37 seconds behind. So in one day, Lance has topped the only practice session of the weekend and qualified 15th for the sprint race. On to SQ3. So the standard ruling for SQ3 is that it's an 8-minute session and the drivers have to use soft tyres for it. However, when the session started, the rain had picked up considerably from the end of SQ2 through to the start of SQ3, and by the time the drivers went out on track, they were not going to be able to set any sort of lap time on a slick tyre. So all of the drivers set their lap times on the intermediates. It was extremely wet and arguably too wet for inters. Not too wet, but it was on the verge. They were struggling to control the cars as it was. But obviously, if they'd gone on to wet tyres, their laps would have been extremely slow. There's no point using that for qualifying because it'd be like driving a tractor. So they basically just had to skid around the lap and keep control of it. So it was very much a case of the drivers who are very proficient in the wet and very skilled in the wet kind of showing their skills rather than necessarily the fastest cars showing their skills, if that makes sense. It was very much down to the drivers for this one. So at the start of the session, as they're all waiting for the green light at the end of the pit lane, Lando Norris is told on his team radio that the rain is expected to continue at this intensity. At this point, they're all sat on their inters waiting to go out. And everybody did manage to not crash, which was very good, as in like session ending crash. Leclerc did go into the barriers. He managed to get back on track. He basically went spinning 720 degrees. His back end just went completely out from behind him. He span 720 degrees into the barriers, but not with enough force to cause any real damage. So he gets back on track and gets back to the pits, puts on a fresh set of inters, checks for damage, goes back out to set a lap. Lando Norris seems to be kind of wobbling about as well, but again, he is one of the drivers that is very, very good at wet weather driving. As we have seen in many, many qualifying sessions before, he is particularly skilled at finding the limit and staying on the limit in a wet lap. So he actually ended up topping SQ3, which meant that he was going to be on pole for the start of the sprint race and set a lap time of 1 minute 57.94 seconds. So that just shows you the difference between the lap times in the wet and the dry. Fernando Alonso had a pit lane infringement that was noted at the pit exit. That was deemed no further action by the stewards. Basically, he had overtaken Zhou in the pit exit road, and it was looked at whether he'd done that before going over the line. That meant he'd left the pit lane, basically. So he was looked at in case he'd overtaken in the pit lane. He hadn't. It was all good. Verstappen had a lap time deleted for going off track at turn 6 during his flying lap, which is where Lando Norris had gone off earlier when I said about him wobbling about a bit. And Piastri was very much drifting around the track. Lewis Hamilton went into the pits to get a new set of intermediates to try and find some grip, because he again was struggling for grip, but he is also a driver that is very well known for being incredibly skilled in wet conditions. And he did actually say to the media afterwards that when it started raining, it made him very, very happy, because it meant that it was going to be down to him and his skill rather than the limitations of the car. Zhou Guanyu had a time deleted at turn 6 for track limits. Hamilton had a time deleted for turn 6 at track limits. Verstappen had another lap time deleted at the final corner for track limits. And before his lap time was deleted, that time would have been good enough for 4. Norris had a lap time deleted that would have been good enough for 2nd from another final corner track limits violation. And then Hamilton set a time of 1 minute 59.321. And this at the time was the pole time for the session. And it was 0.892 seconds faster than Fernando Alonso's lap time, who at this point was in P2. Lando Norris then sets his pole position time of 1 minute 57.94. And he goes up to P1. He then gets that lap time deleted for track limits at turn 16, the final corner, and it is then reinstated because basically what the stewards had done, and there was a lot of controversy about this online because people thought there was favouritism being displayed there. What had happened is they had deleted his lap time incorrectly. So the usual kind of ruling on lap times is if a lap is deleted because they've gone over track limits at the final corner, the next lap is also deleted. That's standard qualifying rules. However, in the wet for this session, they were not deleting the next lap for anybody that had had a track limits violation at the final corner because they were not gaining any time from that. They weren't going over track limits to get a better start into their next lap. They were just going over track limits because the track was so wet. So nobody else, like when I've mentioned Verstappen earlier on, getting track time deleted, things like that, nobody else had their next lap attempt deleted because of it. Lando Norris did incorrectly, so that put Lewis Hamilton P1, but then they realised that they had deleted the wrong lap and quickly reinstated his pole time, and that meant that he was on pole. He was the first person to get a pole position of any kind other than Max Verstappen in 2024, with Lewis Hamilton, the closest qualifier behind him, 1.261 seconds off of his pace. Fernando Alonso qualified in P3, 1.975 seconds behind. Verstappen in P4, 2.088 seconds behind. Sainz P5, 2.274 seconds behind. Perez P6, 2.435 seconds behind. Leclerc P7, 2.626 seconds behind. Piastri P8, 3.05 seconds behind. Bottas P9, 3.104 seconds behind. And Zhou P10, 5.597 seconds behind. Now on to the sprint race. So, of course, here in the UK, that was at 4 a.m. So it was a bit of a fever dream, to be honest. Looking back on it now, it feels like a fever dream because I just woke up in the middle of the night, wrote some notes, went back to sleep. So let's get into it. Everybody other than George Russell started the sprint race on medium tyres, and George decided from P11 to start on the soft tyres in an attempt to have more pace and get overtaking people very fast. So Norris, Hamilton and Sainz were on brand new medium tyres, and pretty much everybody else in the top 10 had tyres that are about 3 or 4 laps old. So they weren't used, but they weren't new. They were scrubbed, you know? It was a very slow lap to the grid. Lando was sat waiting on pole for quite a while, and he is also the only driver other than Max Verstappen to start on sprint pole more than once so far in Formula 1. On lap 1, Lewis Hamilton had an absolutely gorgeous start. Norris and Hamilton had a little fight around turn 1 and 2, and Norris massively lost out. So he ran wide around the outside and lost 6 places, went down to P7, while Hamilton goes into the lead, which is also the first time that he has led a sprint race in Formula 1. Sainz is also making moves on Verstappen and almost gets passed by Perez while he is doing so. On lap 2, Stroll complains on his team radio that Hülkenberg pushed him off track. That is noted by the race stewards, but no further action is deemed necessary. On lap 3, Bottas and Russell kind of like having a little battle, passing each other backwards and forwards, and Verstappen asks on his team radio why his battery is flat and is told to start messing around with the engine modes to sort that out. On lap 4, Russell passes Magnussen for P10. On lap 5, Zhou and Bottas are looked at for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. Of course, they are the Sauber teammates. And a lovely little DRS train has already formed from Sainz. So it's going Sainz, Perez, Norris, And then outside of the points, Magnussen, Bottas, Ricciardo, Stroll, Hülkenberg, Ocon, Gasly, Tsunoda. And then the 2 Williams were behind that, out of DRS range. On lap 7, Verstappen is within the DRS range of Fernando Alonso, gaining on him in sectors 2 and 3, and then towards the end of the lap he passes Alonso and is 1.8 seconds behind Hamilton. On lap 8, Hamilton says this thing won't even turn in the slow speed, just showing what he thinks of the Mercedes. I really think mentally he is done. I think mentally Lewis is already in 2025 and I don't blame him. It seems like it's getting a bit beefy behind the scenes at Mercedes and just disrespectful, to be quite honest, with some of the things that Toto Wolff has been saying to the media. So it does really seem like Lewis is kind of done with them. And I don't really blame him, to be quite honest. He locks up the left front, so the outside tyre, and goes wide at the hairpin, which means that Verstappen is now 0.7 seconds behind him going into the main straight. On lap 9, Russell passes Zhou for P9, and Hamilton is being told about Verstappen, to which he replies, "Leave me to it, man, I can see him." Verstappen then passes Hamilton in the same place that he passed Fernando Alonso a couple of laps before. On lap 11, Piastri is 5.6 seconds behind Norris, ahead of him in P7, so he is in the last of the points places. And then there is a DRS train that has formed from Fernando Alonso in P3 down to Lando Norris in P7. Also, Pierre Gasly passes Hülkenberg for P16. On lap 12, Russell is told, "You're doing a great job managing your tyres, stopping them from graining up. Now you can push a bit." Of course, he is on the soft tyres, so he's going to have to do considerably more tyre management than everybody else on the medium tyres to be able to make those tyres last to the end of the race. On lap 14, Charles Leclerc says that he has some derating on his team radio, which is basically when the MG UK runs out of energy and no longer provides the power boost that it is meant to provide for that extra electrical energy propelling the car. And Albon passes Hülkenberg. On lap 15, Leclerc is trying to get past Perez and failing at this point. Sainz is very, very close behind Alonso. Stroll and Ocon have a little battle that ends up with Stroll being ahead. Ricciardo passes Bottas. Perez complains on his team radio that he doesn't have any traction. And the DRS train at this point has dropped Lando Norris. So, having started on pole, he's now in P7 and not gaining on those ahead of him. Alonso to Leclerc are very, very close, however. On lap 16, Sainz and Alonso make contact at turn 7 while battling for P3. Perez then takes advantage of this, goes past both of them, taking P3, ending up ahead of them. Leclerc then passes Alonso. So they've come out of it in a very different order to what they went into it. They came out of it, Perez in P3, Sainz P4, Leclerc P5, and Alonso all the way down where he had been running in P3. On lap 17, the Ferraris are battling. Leclerc goes wide because Sainz was driving very aggressively and basically just ran him wide. It was noted by race control. They decided they didn't need to do any further investigations, but it was a little bit spicy, shall we say. And Alonso has a front right puncture from the contact with Sainz the lap before. He goes into the pits for new tyres, which have completely ruined his sprint race. He's now down at the bottom of the grid, hovering around P17 and P18, when he had, of course, been running all the way up there, P3, P4. Leclerc then passes Sainz after Sainz goes wide, and on lap 18 we hear Leclerc's radio where he makes it clear that he is not happy. He says, "Let's talk, we need to talk about this. He's fighting me more than the others." Of course, not really what you should be doing. And he also swore, but I'm not going to repeat what he said. At this point, Lando Norris is all over the back of Carlos Sainz, and Alonso pits once again to retire the car. He then, after the race, received a 10-second penalty added to his elapsed time and 3 penalty points, which takes him up to 6 points for the 12-month period. And the stewards have also asked for more clarification in the rules because they basically decided to give him this 10-second penalty because they deemed that he was at fault for the contact with Sainz, and the new ruling as standard is that the penalty for causing a collision is a 10-second penalty. But of course, he'd retired from the race, so adding 10 seconds to his race time doesn't do anything to him, but because he'd completed 18 of the 19 laps, that meant he'd elapsed enough race distance to be classified as a finisher rather than retiring from the race. So they basically just wanted a bit of clarification on that, because they've given a penalty that didn't really mean anything, other than, of course, the 3 penalty points on his licence. And then on lap 19, the final lap of the race, Verstappen is 11 seconds into the lead as of the start of this lap. Sainz, again, driving quite aggressively. I think he's really trying to show teams that he should have a seat next year, but equally everyone knows he should have a seat next year, and driving aggressively, especially with your teammate, isn't necessarily the best way to show teams that they should hire you, but who knows. Russell goes up to P8, benefiting from Fernando Alonso's retirement, which means he is, of course, now within the points for the sprint race. And Lando Norris, on his team radio, apologises for losing P1 at the start of the race, to which it was really nice. We heard that Andrea Stella basically said, like, you don't need to apologise, we need to give you a good car. It's nice that McLaren seems to be a very supportive environment for their drivers at the moment. Also, right at the end, Ocon passes Stroll. So the finishing order of the sprint race was Max Verstappen in P1 with a race time of 32 minutes and 4.66 seconds. Hamilton P2, lovely, we love to see it. Perez P3, Leclerc P4, Sainz P5, Norris P6, Piastri P7, Russell P8. There's your points positions. Zhou P9, so he is 1 position out of getting points. Magnussen P10, Ricciardo P11, Bottas P12, Ocon P13, Stroll P14, Gasly P15, Tsunoda P16, Albon P17, Sargent P18, Hülkenberg P19, and then Fernando Alonso down in P20, having retired from the race but also being classed as a finisher. So, of course, Verstappen down to Russell all got points. Verstappen getting 8 points, Russell getting 1. And then on to qualifying for the main race. So Q1 was topped by Max Verstappen with a time of 1 minute 43.742. There was a pit lane incident noted for Hülkenberg that was to be investigated after the session. Basically, he ended up getting a reprimand, which is his first reprimand of the season, for overtaking 2 cars in the fast lane of the pit lane. He basically checked on his team radio that he could do that, and he was told that he could incorrectly. And then the stewards have gone, no, you can't do that. So here's a reprimand. Tsunoda says on his team radio that his DRS is not working. Perez goes wide off the track and basically complains about Albon being in his way. That was noted for impeding by race control, but no further investigation was done on that. He basically just complained. He said, what the F was that? What was he doing there? Albon said, I got out of his way as much as I could. It's just one of those things. Sainz was on mediums at the start of Q1, and then very quickly Ferrari abandoned that plan and put him onto soft tyres. Ricciardo had a front left brake fire issue, which was nice and fun for him. And we had a yellow flag in Sector 2 in the last minute of the session because Logan Sargent span. Hamilton locked up on his last lap attempt, leaving him at risk with others setting laps behind him. Basically, he didn't go off track or anything, but he did lose a bit of time in the corner where he had locked up. When he crossed the line, his lap time was good enough for P12, I believe, which of course gets him out of the bottom 5. But then with people finishing their laps behind him, they pushed him down, and he did end up qualifying for the race in P18. So it was a varied day for Lewis. You know, the day before he'd qualified P2. That day, he'd finished P2 in the sprint race, and now he was qualifying P18 for the main race. So, very, very up and down for him. The 5 drivers out in Q1 were Zhou Guanyu. He was 0.048 seconds from the cutoff, so he would be going to be starting the race in P16. Kevin Magnussen in P17, 0.059 seconds off. Hamilton P18, 0.116 seconds off. Tsunoda P19, 0.289 seconds off. And Sargent P20, 0.901 seconds off. In Q2, we had Max Verstappen topping the session with a time of 1 minute 33.794. With 7 minutes of the session to go, we had a red flag because Sainz basically slid backwards towards the barrier. He had gone into the gravel at the final corner and then spun because obviously you're not going to have much grip in the gravel. He got back to the pits with no front wing, but Ferrari did need to sort out the car and get him out again for one last chance at a lap. He did manage to get out, and he ended up setting the third fastest lap of Q2. This was protested by Aston Martin after the fact because they argued that having caused the red flag, he shouldn't have been allowed to continue with qualifying. But they did not win their protest, so they basically spent €2,000 to be told, no, Sainz is still going to be starting where he qualified, thank you very much. And the 5 drivers that were out in Q2 were Lance Stroll in P11, 0.069 seconds from the cutoff, Ricciardo in P12, 0.165 seconds off, Ocon P13, 0.454 seconds off, Albon P14, 0.472 seconds off, and Pierre Gasly P15, 0.694 seconds off. Q3 was topped by Max Verstappen with a pole time of 1 minute 33.660 seconds. As the final laps finished, everybody from Sainz downwards goes onto the front row. So everybody's just basically setting a faster lap than the person ahead of them. So the qualifying order of the top 10 for the race, as I've said, we had Max Verstappen on pole. This was Red Bull's 100th pole position in the sport, and it is the first time that the first 5 poles of the season all go to the same driver since Mika Hakkinen in 1999. We had Sergio Perez completing the front row for a Red Bull front row lockout. He was 0.322 seconds behind Verstappen's qualifying time. We had Alonso P3, Norris P4, Piastri P5, Leclerc P6, Sainz P7, Russell P8, Hülkenberg P9 and Bottas P10. And now finally onto the race itself. So, pre-race, a little bit of information for you. Hamilton, Stroll, Tsunoda and Sargent all started the race on the soft tyres. Magnussen started on the hards and everybody else was on mediums. It was most likely that it was going to be a 2-stop strategy, but like Leclerc the previous race in Japan, it was possible that somebody could make the 1-stop work, but it would be a big risk. Sargent had to start from the pits for changing the front wing nose assembly, rear wing gurney and setup of the suspension while under part firming conditions. On lap 1, Alonso gets past Perez for P2 around turn 1 and 2. It was beautiful. Magnussen and Zhou have a little battle, which Tsunoda takes advantage of and passes both of them. Hamilton passes Magnussen, gets passed back. This is all the way down in P19. And Ferrari infighting allows George Russell to get past into P6. Basically, it seemed like Leclerc took revenge for the day before and decided to push Sainz off track the way that he'd been pushed off track. On lap 2, DRS was enabled and Magnussen passes Zhou for P17, Stroll passes Hülkenberg for P9. Hamilton says on his team radio that he's making no ground with the soft tyre, so the Mercedes strategy of putting him on the softs and making up positions at the start to get up from P18 has not worked. And Albon complains about Ocon moving everywhere under braking. On lap 3, Hamilton passes Zhou for P18 and Stroll is noted for forcing Hülkenberg off track. On lap 4, Hamilton passes Magnussen for P17. On lap 5, Perez passes Alonso down the inside of turn 6 for P2. And also, this is just after we heard on Lando Norris's radio that it looked like Alonso was pushing his tyres a lot harder than the McLaren's, which he was told was very good because it meant that while they were on the same tyre, Alonso's were going to be falling off sooner. So Lando was going to have a bit of tyre life in him to be able to try and get past Alonso a little bit later on. Basically saying, don't push your tyres trying to get past him because his are going to be awful before ours are. Also on lap 5, Albon and Gasly are noted for forcing another driver off track. That was because Gasly had been pushed off track by Albon. On lap 7, Lando Norris passes Alonso with DRS for P3. It was very nice. He goes down the straight with DRS, passes him, and then basically blocks Alonso from being able to do a switchback around the corner. On lap 9, Leclerc makes a move on Russell, gets passed into P6. Hülkenberg pits. So this is literally 9 laps into the race. Hülkenberg pits, has a 2.9 second stop coming out in P18 on the hards. Tsunoda has a 2.2 second pit stop coming out in P19 on the mediums. And Zhou pits having a 3 second stop coming out in P20 on the hards. Tsunoda almost crashed with Zhou in the pits. That might be a little bit dramatic, but there was a moment where they were almost kind of released as Zhou was coming in and Tsunoda was released. It could have been a bit spicy. On lap 10, Hamilton pits, has a 2.5 second stop coming out in P19 on the mediums. Stroll comes out in P13 on the mediums, Bottas P15 on the hards, Ocon P16 on the hards, and Albon P18 on the mediums. On lap 11, Tsunoda passes Albon for P17, Hamilton passes Albon for P18, and Piastri and Leclerc had a little battle. Piastri had to back out of defence before they ended up coming together, and Leclerc got ahead into P4. On lap 12, Alonso pits, has a 2.6 second stop coming out in P10 on the hards. Russell has a 2.5 second stop coming out in P11 on the mediums, and Gasly has an absolute disaster of a pit stop, being stationary for 19.3 seconds. His rear right wasn't on properly, and as he tried to leave, he literally only went like half a metre forwards, but as he tried to leave, it came off and hit a mechanic, and they were knocked over, and that was looked at after the race, with Alpine being fined €10,000 for not ensuring that the car complied with the conditions of eligibility and safety during the race. On lap 13, Logan Sargent pits, coming out in P19, and Hamilton absolutely sends it around the outside of turn 1, getting up into P15 ahead of Yuki Tsunoda. On lap 14, the Red Bulls double stack, so Verstappen has a 2.1 second stop coming out in P4, and Perez has a 2 second stop coming out in P6. This means that Lando Norris is now leading the race. On lap 15, Ricciardo pits, has a 2.4 second stop coming out in P18 on the mediums. On lap 16, Verstappen is all over the back of Leclerc and passes him for P2 into the hairpin, and Ricciardo passes Zhou for P17. On lap 17, Piastri goes into the pits with a 2.8 second stop coming out in P9 on the mediums. Perez almost goes into the back of Sainz, and Leclerc and Norris both are showing a good pace still, so they are beginning to think about maybe extending onto a one-stop strategy. On lap 18, Perez passes Sainz just as Sainz is entering the pits anyway. He has a 2.4 second stop coming out in P10 on the hards, and Magnussen also goes into the pits coming out in P20 on the hards after a 2.7 second stop. On lap 19, Piastri passes Stroll for P9 using his DRS, Sainz passes Hülkenberg for P9, and Verstappen passes Norris for P1. On lap 20, Ricciardo passes Tsunoda for P14, and the gap between Verstappen and Norris is already up to 2.5 seconds. On lap 21, Bottas says on his radio, engine is gone, and they throw a yellow flag in sectors 2 and 3 because he is at turn 11 with the car stopped. He'd completed 19 laps of his own race, and Sainz tried to pass Stroll but locked up, and Stroll was able to pass back again, and of course Sainz would now be driving with a flat spot. On lap 22, the virtual safety car was deployed, and arguably it should have come out a lot sooner. It should have come out when the yellow flag was thrown, because that's the whole point of the virtual safety car, that they can just throw it whenever and they don't have to wait for a physical car, and it slows everybody down to make sure that the risk of a fatal accident happening is considerably minimised. But they took a very long time to throw the VSC. Supposedly that was because they were trying to work out if the marshals could move the car, but the car appeared to be stuck in gear, so a lot of marshals were around it trying to move it, and they were still around it on lap 23 trying to move it. Like, it took them a very long time to be able to move the car, so I really don't know why they didn't do anything sooner, but they didn't. So when they announced the virtual safety car, Lando Norris had just passed the pit entrance, and he had been saying on his team radio that there was going to be a safety car. There was debris on track, there was going to be a safety car, they needed to take advantage of it. McLaren didn't call him into pits, so he was understandably quite fuming. Leclerc, however, did manage to get into the pits, so he comes out on the hard tyres in P5, Stroll pits coming out in P13 on the hards, and Hamilton pits coming out in P17 on the hards. On lap 23, Lando Norris then pits, coming out in P3 on the hard tyres, so he's only lost position at this point to Perez. Arguably, if he'd been able to pit the lap before, he potentially would have been able to maintain P2. But of course, he was not able to do that because McLaren didn't call him in. And then the full safety car was announced. So on lap 24, Verstappen pits, coming out in P1 still, because he has basically a free pit stop on the hard tyres. Perez pits, very luckily, for Lando and for Charles. Perez pits, coming out in P4 on the hard tyres, which means that both Norris and Leclerc are able to jump ahead again. Alonso pits onto the soft tyres, coming out in P7, lap 24. And this man's on the soft tyres. Yeah. Russell pits, coming out in P8. Hulkenberg P12, Ocon P13, Zhou P18 and Gasly P19. On lap 25, Piastri pits, he has a 2.2 second stop and comes out in P8. And there is a safety car infringement between Sargent and Hulkenberg that is noted. At this point, I was quite confused because it was showing on the driver tracking that Hulkenberg was in P11 and Sargent was down in P17. I think Sargent pitted and I just missed it because I was very confused by this. But basically, Sargent got a 10-second penalty for overtaking Hulkenberg under safety car conditions and not giving the place back. So as Hulkenberg left the pits, Sargent was coming down the main straight. And when they crossed safety car line 2, Hulkenberg was marginally ahead. And that meant that because Sargent was carrying more speed, he's gone into the corner ahead. He's overtaken Hulkenberg. And that was within the actual technical specifications of the rules. He had broken that rule. But it did seem very marginal. And he also got 2 penalty points for it as well. So that is 8 penalty points for the 12-month period. On lap 26, it was announced that the safety car was going to be ending. And Norris is told on his team radio, we think everybody is going to try to get to the end on the tyres they've got from pitting now, apart from Alonso on the softs. Because, of course, Alonso is not going to manage to get to the end on the soft tyres. It's not going to happen. We see at the final corner of the lap that Ricciardo has gone down to P11 and Stroll goes into the pits on the restart. And everyone's like, what's going on there? How's Ricciardo lost positions? We're only just restarting. How's he lost positions? And why has Stroll gone into the pits? Surely you should have done that last lap. Let me tell you. So, there was a big bunch up. A very big bunch up of cars. And Stroll ran into the back of Ricciardo after this bunch up. Basically, all the way back from P1, Verstappen. He was very much back in the pack up to try and get a good restart. So, all the way back from Verstappen, it was getting a bit bunchy. Alonso to Stroll got very bunched up very fast, and Stroll ran into the back of Daniel Ricciardo. He then, on his team radio, said, "This idiot just slammed on the brakes. Check front wing damage." Because he's thinking at this point that Daniel Ricciardo has just braked far too soon, far too sharply. He's not realised that Daniel Ricciardo had to brake that hard and that fast because he was going to hit Oscar Piastri, and Oscar Piastri had to brake because he was going to hit Fernando Alonso, and Fernando Alonso had to brake. It was a whole chain reaction. So Stroll runs into the back of Daniel Ricciardo, basically impregnates the car. Ricciardo then ever so slightly runs into Piastri, so Piastri then picks up floor damage, and it is noted by race control. Stroll ended up getting a 10-second penalty and 2 penalty points for it because the stewards said that he ought to have anticipated the pace of the cars in front, particularly car 3, and should have prepared to brake accordingly. So Stroll now has 7 points for the 12-month period. Ricciardo spoke very angrily about him afterwards and about the incident. He said, "F that guy," but the actual words, "and I'm being nice too." And he just kind of ran his mouth. And I just don't see the need for it. I really don't. I really think that it was immature. Obviously, a lot of other drivers on the grid, if Yuki Tsunoda had been saying that, he would have been absolutely slated. Yuki has to say one thing and he gets called aggressive. Daniel Ricciardo is running his mouth to the media, not being very professional, and absolutely slating Lance Stroll for something that, to be quite honest, when I watched it, I was surprised that Stroll even got a penalty for. Like, when I first watched it, I was like, I wouldn't really say that he got a penalty for that. That's not my opinion. I don't think he should have got a penalty. I think it was unfortunate. But, again, people are very quick to slag Lance Stroll off and say that he's a bad driver. He's not. So, I don't know. It's just a bit double standardsy. But, anyway, moving on. Also, on the restart, Yuki Tsunoda, bless his little heart, I love that man. He was out of the race. He had contact from behind with Magnussen, which ended up with him being spun around, and that was noted by race control as well. Magnussen received a 10-second penalty and 2 penalty points, so he's now got 5 for the 12-month period, and that was Yuki out of the race, unfortunately. Hamilton got up to P11, Magnussen limped back round to the pits, and Alonso passed Sainz for P5 before the safety car was back out again. Because, of course, there was a fair amount of debris on the track. On lap 28, Ricciardo is told that they have floor damage, and Hülkenberg passes Ricciardo during the safety car, which is permitted in Article 55.8 of the sporting regulations, because Ricciardo had slowed considerably with the damage from the incident with Stroll. So, yes, you shouldn't overtake under safety car conditions, but if the car ahead of you is slowed considerably, seems to be in some sort of trouble, has damage, anything that means that forcing yourself to stay behind it would then be more dangerous than passing it, you're allowed to pass it. However, because Hülkenberg passed him the lap before, Daniel Ricciardo on lap 29 then overtakes Hülkenberg under the safety car with no justifiable basis. In his mind, he's thinking, well, he passed me and hasn't given the position back, so I'm going to pass him back. However, the steward said, absolutely not. There was no reason for you to have overtaken him then. And Daniel Ricciardo got a 10-second penalty imposed, but because, of course, as I'm about to tell you, he had to retire from the race, that meant that was converted to a 3-place grid penalty for his next race, along with 2 penalty points, giving him 2 in the 12-month period. So, the next race is Miami. If Daniel Ricciardo still has a seat in Miami, he will be starting 3 places back from wherever he qualifies at a minimum. Of course, they could choose to take more penalties at this point, gearbox, engine, that sort of thing. Safety car ended on lap 31. On lap 32, Hülkenberg passes Ricciardo for P9, Hamilton passes Ricciardo for P10. On lap 33, when DRS is enabled again, Ocon passes Ricciardo for P11, Albon passes for P12. Ricciardo says, I've got no rear on all of the exits. Sargent gets a 10-second penalty, which I spoke about earlier. Ricciardo is then told to retire the car, and then Stroll and Magnussen both also get their 10-second penalties. In quick succession, all 3 of them are gone. 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds. On lap 34, Stroll passes Magnussen. There's a little battle around the lap towards the back straight. Then Magnussen uses DRS to get back ahead. Stroll then dives ahead again, finally sticks ahead at the final corner of the lap, and Magnussen chases him right down the main straight, but Stroll makes it stick into turn 1 and stays ahead. On lap 35, Perez is struggling with low speed understeer, and that meant that Norris and Leclerc have really been able to break away from him. On lap 36, Stroll pits, serves his penalty, comes out in P17 on some hard tyres, and Norris is also seeming to struggle with low speed understeer. He is told on his team radio, for low speed understeer, we suggest engine braking. He just replies, no, thank you. He's like, I will not be doing that, but thank you. On lap 37, Gasly passes Sargent for P13. On lap 39, Zhou passes Sargent for P14. Gasly pits, coming out on the medium tyres in P16. Perez makes a move on Leclerc at the hairpin of turn 6, gets up to P3. Leclerc asks on his team radio, are you sure we're pushing for plan D? These tyres are so bad. And he is told, everyone is plan D, we believe, which is basically just to the end of the race on these tyres. On lap 40, Piastri asks how much damage he has and is told that the damage level is significant. On lap 41, Hamilton moves on Hülkenberg. Hülkenberg manages to just stay ahead as Hamilton has to tuck in around the final corner. Joe Pitts has a 3.2 second stop coming out on the soft tyres in P16. Hamilton then passes Hülkenberg for P9. On lap 43, Magnussen passes Sargent for P13. On lap 44, Alonso Pitts has a 2.9 second stop coming out in P12 on the medium tyres. On lap 46, Alonso overtakes Albon for P11, sets the fastest lap of the race, which was a 1 minute 37.81 second lap, and then passes Ocon for P10. On lap 40, Alonso passes Hülkenberg for P9, and Gasly passes Sargent for P14, and then Sargent passes Gasly back again. And on lap 49, Alonso dipped a wheel into the gravel chasing Hamilton. He slides but keeps control of the car, then gains on Hamilton and passes him for P8. But that was very, very nearly a disaster, and I would not have been surprised if the inside of his race suit at that point was brown. Like, that could have been the end of his race. But he managed to pass Hamilton. He then also passed Piastri that lap for P7. On lap 50, Zhou passes Sargent for P15. On lap 53, Gasly makes a lunge down the inside of Magnussen for P13. On lap 54, Zhou passes Magnussen for P14, but loses a bit of his front wing end plate in doing so. On lap 55, Verstappen says, "I might have just run over a bit of debris, check my tyres." And for just a brief second, there was a little glimmer of hope. That Max Verstappen was not going to win the race. I thought, for that 1 second, last lap of the race, Lando Norris is going to win. Verstappen's going to have a puncture. This is incredible. Didn't happen. I can tell you that for free. Lap 56, only thing that happens is Stroll passes Sargent for P16. And the finishing order of the race, we had Max Verstappen winning the race once again. 1 hour, 40 minutes, 52.554 seconds. Lando Norris in P2, 13 seconds behind. He won Driver of the Day with 26% of the vote. This was his 15th career podium, his 8th second place in Formula 1, and he had incredible pace, considering China was not somewhere that McLaren were expecting to be very good at. Don't really know what happened there, but it was stunning. His race pace was faster than Sergio Perez, so he was faster than the second Red Bull. The McLarens were both surprised by the lack of Ferrari pace. It was just a bit of a surprise weekend for McLaren. We then had Perez completing the podium, 19 seconds behind Verstappen. Then Leclerc P4, Sainz P5, Russell P6, Alonso P7 with the fastest lap point as well. Piastri P8, Hamilton P9, Hülkenberg P10. That rounds out the points finishers. Then Ocon P11, Albon P12, Gasly P13, Zhou P14 at home. And there was a lovely moment as well when he finished where, instead of going to Parc Fermé, the organisers of the Chinese Grand Prix had his own little special place for him to go and park on the grid with like a board, the same as they have boards for P1 to 2 and 3. They had one that said Zhou, and he went and parked there, and there was like a lovely emotional little moment where he just had all of this support and all of these fans cheering for him, and it was really beautiful. People tried to slag him off for it. People tried to be like, "Why are you crying? You finished 14th. He is the first ever Chinese Formula 1 driver racing at home in China. Realistically, around the rest of the calendar, he doesn't really have that much support. There aren't really that many people that are there for him. There are people that are fans of other people that also like him, but there's not that many people that are like, I am here for Zhou Guanyu, you know? So he is not used to that level of support, and he's racing at home in his home city, being the first driver from his country to ever make it into Formula 1, a country that does not have a big culture around motorsport, a country that does not have this whole path into Formula 1 the way that Italy and the UK do. And he's got a whole grandstand of thousands of people in front of him all cheering for him, and you think he's not going to get emotional? Grow up. Anyway, P15 was Lance Stroll, and then Magnussen P16, Sargent P17. Magnussen and Sargent didn't pit to serve their penalties, so their 10 seconds were both added post-race. So Magnussen did actually finish P15 on track, but with the penalty added, ended up P17. P16, and then Sargent last place, P17. Then we had, of course, Ricciardo DNFing on lap 33, Tsunoda DNFing on lap 26, and Bottas DNFing, having completed 19 laps. And one last little thing as well from basically the lap back to the pits afterwards. Norris was not told on his team radio that he needed, because he was on the podium, he needed to go back to the grid. So he's in the pit entry and he's like, Will, have you forgotten to tell me something here? And his engineer, Will Joseph, is like, yes, I'm very sorry. You should have been on the grid. So sorry about that. You're going to have to leave the car and run. So Norris has to park up in the pits in Parc Fermé and get himself over to the grid. And also on his lap back to the pits, he did dedicate his podium to his mum for her birthday the day before, which was very sweet. So that is everything after a very long one. That is everything that I was going to talk about from a action-packed Chinese Grand Prix. It really was. Of course, we've got a week's break now, and then in 2 weeks' time it is the Miami Grand Prix. So I will see you very soon with another episode. I hope you've enjoyed this one. If you have, please do let me know. Like, rate, comment, subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Please share the podcast. Get the word out there. You know, why not? What's it going to do if you don't? You know? Exactly. So, yeah. Come and join me over on the Pitboards and Podiums TikTok. I have decided that I am going to post at least once every single day in May. And you're going to be able to hold me accountable because I've said that on here now. So come and join me over there and we'll have just the best time. And yeah, thank you again so much for watching and listening, however you chose to consume this. I will see you very, very soon. And that is all I have to say. Bye!